All right. According to the clock, it's time. So let's get started. Welcome to the Jmap virtual meeting in Prague, except not, and with random sleep. As usual, we cover right at the start that we are covered under this note. Well, we often just kind of skip through this because most of us are very used to it. It's easy if you search IETF note well to find a more readable version of this than what's on the screen here. But mostly it's if you are aware of any patents, then you need to disclose them if you participate in the discussion. These recordings may be made public, and behave yourself. Be a good, non-harassy, code of conducty following person. This is the rough agenda that I put together. I probably should put a disclaimer on these agendas when I put them together that we often don't spend exactly the time that's mentioned for each document. We'll spend longer on some, shorter on others. So don't assume that you can show up exactly 70 minutes into the meeting and you'll be at exactly the thing that we say is going to be 70 minutes in, but we'll try and stick to this order. Before we get started, does anyone have anything you want to change on this? Anything to add, remove? The whole agenda bash? Not seeing anything. Awesome. I guess let's get straight into it. I've divided it roughly up into 3 sections. The calendars and related things, calendars, tasks, and sharing all come under that. No necessary need to stay in a particular order, but this is what we have. Then JS contact and all the stuff related to that. There's a couple of different drafts in there, but I've just mentioned it as one thing. And then blob is there with Civ because it's mostly set up for that, but will also be used for other things. And any other business, I don't know if we'll use the full 2 hours, but let's get into it and see. So the first thing on the topics is the Jmap calendars, and these are the slides that I have. Go for it, Neil.
Hi. Yes. So I think as Jabron said with the agenda, well, time stuff's not been quite right, but Jmap for calendars. So I think we had a discussion last time, and so there've been quite a few changes in the draft based on that. So I thought I'd just give a quick summary of what those changes are. See if there's any things people want to discuss about that. And then I think the main thing to talk about is really how the tasks relate to it. Yeah, so we'll get to that. So if we go to the next slide. So the main changes in the version 5 draft, which is the new one since the last meeting, is whether you act as yourself or as the person that owns the calendar is now the same for all calendars within a particular account, which just simplifies some things. And the set of identities of to determine who you are is a proper data type rather than just being a random property on stuff. So that again just simplifies things. And an event may belong to multiple calendars within an account, although this is up to the server. The server can say, as with Bail, that I only support it being in one if it wants. But yes, this was one of those ones we've talked about quite a bit last time, and it's kind of tricky because there aren't many systems that out there at the moment that do have it in more than one, and it does increase complexity. But if we put it in there, it's more consistent with the mail spec and gives us kind of the protocol, the ability to support multiple, even if we don't need it all the time, because the server can say, I only actually want it to be in one at a time. And then the biggest thing is splitting sharing out into a separate spec, because I realized that this was actually quite generic and something that we would want to use for various for mail and for various other things as well. So the sharing spec defines principals, which is all the kind of entities in a shared system, like individuals or groups or resources, and kind of sets up the framework for how you would then assign permissions to one of those entities to give permission for shared data access, and also the model where you have a permission system say you can access it, and then the person that's had been shared with then gets to subscribe to that to say, yes, I actually want to access this one, which is basically what we were doing before, but just make it a separate spec so it's more easily reusable, as we'll see with the task stuff, because the tasks will want to use all of that as well as calendars. So if we just quickly move on to the next slide, if anyone has any questions or comments, do jump in. So the next steps, still big thing we need, the same as last time, is implementation experience, but this time we're getting close to actually having implemented all of this stuff, I think, and at least in having one set of experience to talk about by the next meeting. I would hope we'll have some, so we can share any experiences there, and obviously find any problems that we run into, and I hope we might see some others as well. And then, yes, I think tasks is probably the best thing to discuss at this meeting. We've had people coming along saying that they're interested in that as well, and spec has been contributed, and so I think the biggest discussion is whether we should be merging that with the calendar spec like CalDAV does, or keeping it separate, and kind of how much there's what's cleaner, what's easier from that. So I think Bron, I don't know how you want to do this, because unless anyone has any particular calendar-based things, I think talking about tasks is probably the best thing to do here. Is there a separate presentation, or?
Sure. We don't have slides for it, but we have people to talk, so
yeah.
Let's go ahead with that.
One calendars related question. So regarding the calendar events in multiple calendars, I was just wondering if we have already figured out the semantics of deleting or changing an event, what it means for events that are in multiple calendars. So if you, I guess, changing an event would change it in all calendars where this event is located in. Deletion,
that's right, yes.
Deletion would delete it just from this calendar.
No, I mean it would work exactly the same as mail. So where you have multiple mailboxes assigned. So
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
exactly.
good.
So if you destroy the event, you're destroying it everywhere. But you can update it to change which calendars it's in, adding or removing them. And there's only one, and it's the same in all of them. Obviously, it's one copy of the event. They're more like labels.
Okay, yeah, right. Makes absolute sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Neil, that would be true. Also true for a schedule event or task. If you receive an update from an attendee, you basically make sure that you update all the various instances. If you have multiple instances.
Yes. If it's yes, within a single account. So within a particular user.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's going to behave similar to CalDAV's.
Similar to what? Sorry, I think Ken just got cut off slightly there.
Similar to CalDAV, I assume, is what he was saying.
Okay.
Yeah, my audio did get cut off there. Yeah, so it's basically we're limiting the problem that CalDAV scheduling had with things in multiple calendars. As long as you find one of the instances, you go ahead and update all of them with whatever changes have come back from the organizer or the attendee.
Yeah,
yes, I guess that's the one restriction. yeah, one restriction it adds. Actually, I don't know if I think this is audio restriction. You can't have, yes, the same event, but different in different calendars within the same account. You can have it different within different accounts. Like different people might have different versions of it or different permissions to view different bits of it, but within a single account, which like might be, one user's set of calendars, there's a consistent view of that event.
Fair enough.
All right, shall we move on to tasks then?
All right, should just take over, Bron? Or?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Yeah, so hello, everybody. As Neil already introduced, we came upon Jmap calendars and found basically that something similar would also be fine for tasks, particularly due to the fact that related standards like CalDAV actually already deal also with both of them, and many tools actually also do it handle in a dual way. So it's kind of natural in that sense to think about also having some Jmap representation for tasks. So what we did basically is we drafted a very initial or created a very initial draft. You see the URL here for this Jmap for tasks. There is certainly a lot of stuff still open, not everything even mentioned here. So in contrast to Jmap for calendars, this is like you see the 0.0 version of the draft. So don't expect too much about it already. But obviously this is a nice way here to kick it off also a little bit. There was a little bit discussion on it also already on the mailing list. So one thing that was some weeks ago already is a point about capabilities, which I think Joris initially raised, who was the main author but cannot be with us here today, unfortunately. And one thing here, I think, which should be differentiated a little bit, and I think that goes also in the direction like Neil raised, if it would be an option to merge it into the Jmap calendars draft or keep it separate. And what our observation is a little bit, even though both things are tightly related, as I said also in CalDAV, I think from an interoperability perspective, there is a little bit of a difference. So calendars, I think, are by nature quite interoperable right now. Many calendar tools can work together. And also the data models for calendars are in a way quite, similar between different tools. But for tasks, we actually see more heterogeneity here. If you, for instance, consider something like Google Task, it's super limited. I think it's just 3 or 4 properties. You cannot do that much there. The more, I would say, extensive models, like you also have in CalDAV or iCalendar, they do have, for instance, like attendees or assignees in that sense. So people involved, you have reminders, these kind of things. So many concepts which you also know from calendars. And obviously for Jmap, it makes sense in a way to keep them in, I think, because obviously tools will support them, but we don't think every tool will do so. And it's maybe also a question of philosophy here a little bit, because we see also Jmap as an option for having some more interoperability and data portability between different kinds of tools. And so it would be actually nice to have some kind of a mechanism in which tools that rather follow, let's say, slim approach to tasks have being possible or able to support the standard, but also tools which do support more advanced features like reminders. And I think for that, something like more fine-grained capabilities would certainly make sense. I mean, I see the point. I think Neil was it that raised it on the mailing list, that obviously it also makes things more difficult for some implementers of the standards. And I think that's one important design decision or trade-off to discuss here, like, where's the sweet spot, or what is like the aspect we want to put more focus on. Yeah, so I don't know if I should first skip through the points or if we want to or if there's some feedback directly on that, or some opinion. I don't know. Otherwise,
what do you want to do, Bron?
yeah, like this.
Yeah, feel
sorry.
free to just discuss. I think we don't need to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good summary. Sorry, is it Hans Jörg? Is that
Yeah,
Hans Jörg?
that's right. Mhm.
Yeah, sorry. So I think you want to find that right balance. You want enough capabilities to support different use cases, but not so many that becomes impossible to write a client because you just have an infinite combination of possible server support to deal with, which is a bit what we see with IMAP with the different extensions and capabilities there. And so people end up just using the very basic stuff that they can rely on everywhere. Yeah, and I agree. This is more of an issue with tasks and calendars, probably. But I think this probably is quite doable, though. As you say, I think that, there's some big ones that you can say, can you assign people to a task? That's a pretty big one. Yeah. And reminders and stuff. So I think we could come up with a set of capabilities. And it doesn't really affect necessarily whether it's in a separate draft, like it's a separate spec to calendar smash, because even if it was in the same spec, it would definitely be behind a separate capability, and that could have its own set of stuff like this, separate to calendar. It's an important point, because this is one of the main things we're trying to work out here is where does tasks differ from calendars, and how much does it differ, I think. And this is one of those areas.
I guess from a practical standpoint, what is the benefit of putting them both in the same document? Is there any? It's
just if there's a lot of copy paste stuff, I think, really, which there is at the moment, but I think probably could be sorted more through editing without necessarily merging the documents. Like I definitely initially wanted them separate, and I kind of still think that would be cleaner, but I think we'll see a bit as we progress.
Maybe one point for that, I don't know what is your experience on this. Keeping it separate would also have some sort of benefit if you would be a task-only tool and you would like to adopt it. You might be less scared by the overhead of the calendar effect. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a real thing. That's a good reason. Keeping it separate.
Okay.
It's the same.
All right.
Same reverse. If you're just doing calendaring, it's like, why is there a task here? It's like, I just want.
I mean, in either way, I think it's perfect, because, as you said, I mean, certainly there is some sort of an overlap, and it's always not so nice to have, to maintain reference and copy paste stuff. So we might also see a little bit like how this evolves in one more version. Also, I think one point for keeping it separate maybe is also the current stage, since I think the Jmap for calendars, it's much more advanced already, and this is in a way earlier, even though might not be that complicated in the end, but still combining it in that way might make it slower for Jmap for calendars somehow also, I don't know, or complicated. But yeah, that's something. Okay, and for the capabilities, I would say, as you said, I think the things that come to my mind is maybe just 3 or 4 core things. So like people or assignees, attendees, this kind of stuff. Recurrences, certainly. So not many tools are supporting recurrences in tasks, even though some do. What else did I mention? Attachments certainly is one thing, which not every tool supports for tasks. And I think I had one more, but I think I mentioned even one more already. Yeah, I think it's
reminders.
Reminders. Exactly. Notifications. Yeah. So these are the core things which I'm aware of, which are not the standard feature set in a task system, whereas they are in a calendar system. And so it would be nice, and I think it would also be doable for implementers to. I think it's not as complicated as in the IMAP case, actually. With all those features there, I think are much more diverse in a certain sense.
Yeah, I think those are all easily put behind capability, so I think that's okay. I think the bigger question to me, I don't know again how different this is between different task managers. I haven't really done a survey or anything. Is this kind of issue of how different is a task list from a calendar? Like, so one of the main differences is at least in the to-do list I use, there's a manual order for the set of to-dos in a list, and you can drag and drop to rearrange them and stuff. And so I think that's something you want to support. Whereas with events, there's no ordering within the calendar other than by date or whatever other property you want to use.
That's actually a very good point. Actually, that was one I was personally missing, obviously, so I didn't think about it. I still need to look it up. It doesn't. It seems to make sense what you say, but actually, at least from the groupware system supporting tasks, let's put it that way, I'm not aware of any really using that. So most just sort the tasks by date or status or something like that. But I'm pretty sure you find something where the order makes some difference. Maybe even it's Google. I need to look it up. I think
I think it depends on the type of task list you're talking about too. I typically have a long list of things with due dates, and they're sorted by due date by default.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
But if it's just a bunch of random things that you need to take care of, and the timing of it doesn't matter, then you may want to sort those, however you prefer to have them sorted.
Yeah, I think you definitely need support for that. I agree. It's different to-do task list managers have different approaches to this, but was kind of the point earlier, is there is more heterogeneity here. And so the interesting thing to me then is, if they have a sort order, doing a many-to-many mapping, that whole thing of, makes perhaps less sense than with events. I don't know, kind of to-do be in more than one to-do list. If it is, you probably need multiple sort order properties as well, because otherwise you can't, you need to have specified where it is in each of those lists. So I don't know whether we want to make it with just one-to-many rather than many-to-many mapping.
Personally, I would say, first of all, the sort order thing sort of makes some sense, and I agree with you. It will be complicated in the situation of multiple task lists. And it will make you crazy to support multiple sort orders for different task lists. I'm not sure if this is really what somebody wants, especially since this multiple task list is sort of motivated by this kind of label kind stuff, right? And here, actually, in practice, we are in a sort of systems, shuffling together the concept of a folder and a label, like you have in Gmail, actually. You see, so in Gmail, you can actually effectively have a label in the Gmail sense, but how Google exposes it via IMAP, it's a folder. Yeah? So it already breaks in their own exposition within their own UI and how they do it on IMAP. So you see this discrepancy a little bit between using folders as labels and labels as folders. So I'm currently not aware if there's a category flag we inherit from the calendar, for instance. So that might already be sufficient to support something like this multiple list approach as a label kind of thing.
Isn't sort just mostly a UI and search feature?
No, well, you need to be able to store it somewhere, because if I have my tasks A, B, C, I want to see them as A, then B, then C in both clients. If I have more than one.
Agree with that.
Well, what if you want to see it in a different order on a different client? I mean,
the client can support that, but I'm saying one of the options, other than just sorting by like due date or whatever property, I think one of the things that should be supported.
Or shared sort list,
I want them in this order.
Or shared sort lists where people want to see them in different orders. It's more related.
Feels like it should be an extension on top of this. You certainly there will be people who do want to have the same sort order between different clients, and that feels like something that we should be supporting in the standard, so that you can rely on it from any client that does sort. You can see what their sort is.
It's not saying you have to sort to do this way if you want.
It sounds much more like a shared view of something than actually anything else. That's sort of what I implement for some stuff we do. Is you have an alias to a collection which has associated with it filtering and sorting.
The thing is, this is not like storing, you should sort by this property, by date. It's the ability for the user to store for the server a manual order for stuff. Does that make sense?
I think the point Mike wanted to make is a little bit like if there should be a distinction, by client first of all, where I would also disagree this is strictly required because I don't see really a use case for that, or if there is one client to do it by themselves. And the second point, Mike, if I got you correctly, is for a collaborative approach where I share a certain task list if there should be different sort orders possible for different users. Is that what you meant, right?
That's what I suspect, yes.
Yeah, but and my point on that would also be, I think it would be maybe engineered a little bit over the top. So I would assume if a team shares really a task list, there is, I mean, if they decide to share the task list as an artifact, I think also the sorting is sort of an designed order which the team shares. So I think I would be rather confused in the team if I share a task list and everybody would maintain a separate order of it on the shared list. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that personally. Yeah.
I see where you're coming from, Mike. I think you're thinking a little bit about the shared calendar issues here, but I think it's a little bit different for a private copy of an event I have, and I want to maintain some private state for that. But typically, I think if a team shares a task list, I think this is more like a shared artifact where should be a common view on that artifact.
Yeah, I think the difference here is within it for a task, the sort order is actually kind of part of the data because it's a way for the user to ad hoc say what order should these things be done in roughly, probably, because by manually drag and dropping them. Whereas for the task list, like calendar, that would also have a sort order property, just like for what order should be in the sidebar, and that might be per user because you might have a different set of task lists for different users, and how you want them arranged in your sidebar might be different. But that's not part of the data. Well, it is data, but yeah, I think there's actually a difference there.
It feels to me kind of like a CodeMD document. You don't have CodeMD documents that multiple people can order the lines in different ways. They're a collaborative
no,
document.
but
and you can
in collaborative work, you might have a project manager who wants to see things in order of due date because the main concern to them is that things get done on time. You might also want to display the things.
This is not stopping them from doing that.
Yeah,
right.
And you may, but if you can reorder stuff on the fly, why not just add some persistence to set what the orderings you want to see by default?
Well, that's precisely what we're suggesting, Mike. But
not embedding it in the data so it's a fixed order. It's just another. It's just another attribute added to the data.
How you? Yeah, I mean that's what it is. It's an attribute that.
But the thing is, there is no attribute you could sort by without adding this to say to allow this custom ordering. That's the thing. Like you could have a separate property if you want to, Mike, to say like on the to-do list itself to say default sort by due date rather than by the sort order property.
Right.
But this is for if you're in your client, you have a sort order drop down. Instead of sorting by due date, you click sort manually, and now you want to drag and drop them into some particular order just for you. Well, not just for you, but yeah, that makes sense to you. And this is how we store that, is by having a sort order property on the tasks themselves as well. Does that make more sense?
Is the name sort order causing confusion here?
Perhaps. Yeah, perhaps we should use different names. It's just because we have that concept already and it is kind of the same.
Dave, feel free to just pop in the conversation, I think, if it doesn't get too crazy.
So I apologize if I don't have enough context, but the kind of discussion you're having is one I've heard many times before in different contexts. The fear I have in what you're saying is not that it's all good stuff. It is all good stuff. The fear is that you're dictating underlying implementation choices that might be more expensive and more complicated than existing choices. The use of the folder construct as an actual storage model is really simple and extremely useful. If the model laying on top of the access mechanism is one that says every query is a search, which is what I think I'm hearing, even though I don't think it's quite what you think you're saying, then you've just altered the cost of using this by a lot.
Yeah, I think that's mainly to do with whether we have a one-to-many or many-to-many mapping for the
Dave, I
to-do
think you're
list.
creating echo.
Whoops. Oh, just a second.
If a task can just belong in one to-do list, well, then it depends whether we want yet another kind of level of hierarchy as well over, does a to-do list do we create folders for those as well, that kind of thing. But I guess there is a bit of a query in terms of how many tasks are in a list. Like, if we expect it always to be a not too high a number, you could say that the list itself is the unit of data, and you fetch the whole list, which is an array of tasks, rather than querying the server for tasks and saying, find me ones that match this list, which requires it to do some kind of filtering. But I don't think the spec requires you to do. I don't think the spec with the current kind of approach forces you not to be able to use folders and stuff like it's saying. So I don't think we've strayed into that, but it's a good point.
Having implemented some other Jmap stuff, often what we've done is we detect that a search is a in folder ID this and no other conditions, and convert that into a very cheap return the list of the folders. So it's more like an SQL optimizer than a pure mapping to underlying behavior. So you can make those kinds of queries cheap, even if they are expressed as a search.
Bron, you brought up the comparison with CodeMD earlier. I wonder if a better example for tasks here might be something like Trello, which would be, kind of a, do we want to provide the underlying capability for a very full-functioned shared task system? And, different from, say, just the reminders app on the Mac.
I think it probably should, or at least we should survey kind of, does it look like this data model would meet that use case if Trello decided they wanted to support an open data, access format next year, kind of thing. And if it doesn't, then we should at least discuss why it doesn't, whether that we should make changes or whether we're happy with that.
So
it sounds like a survey is an important next step here.
We already started this somehow, and so we looked already a little. Sorry, we looked already a little bit into it, and I would also, from a again data portability perspective, try actually to see if something like Trello fits in here as well, because what we've seen so far, we looked already into it. It fits in already quite well. So I think we cover a lot already. We didn't dig into every detail yet, and I think that will be very interesting for some of these points we just discussed. But the overall goal would actually, if it's not, totally stepping away from the core task model here, we should certainly try to make that compatible as well, so it can be used as an exchange format or interoperability approach for those Trello style, Kanban style systems as well. I don't actually know, is there, that's a kind of a meta question, is there a certain format to share such a kind of a comparison or something like that? Because it's certainly not part of the RFC as such.
I know some time back I had a discussion with somebody who got very excited about some of the features we were talking about with iCalendar tasks, and he had a job of transferring, like this gets to data portability, because he had the task of transporting project management data between different systems, and the iCalendar data essentially is a perfect match. What was missing is any export and import tool on those applications. They tend to work on their own, and because nobody's tried to force them into it, they produce their own data and they don't allow you to transport it. But it's a pretty much of a perfect match. You've got people you assign stuff to, you've got a lot of properties and so on and so forth. So it would be a pity to lose that capability in the in this world. Always, I mean, but basically the first thing is obviously to get the data right, and I think we're pretty close to that if we follow the iCalendar model.
Dave popped his hand back up, so we should.
Yep,
I think
go
we're
ahead.
getting to the stage in this conversation where we should try and structure it a little bit more.
So apologize for the audio problems I was having. Meteco doesn't do echo suppression the way other systems do. At any rate,
right there in the name.
Yeah, the echo does meet. Yes. So I think I can clarify what I'm thinking about the folder versus search. There is a model that says everything is a search. You can set a default, and that becomes what you get if you don't say some new search. And that imposes a potentially very substantial underlying complexity on the implementation. There's a different approach which says default, well, start with default, which says however you want to give it to me, and that supports a folder model if that's what the underlying implementation wants to do. And then search is something separate. And then the way you can merge them is by saying that you can go to set the default to be a search, but the underlying implementation can reject that effort, which is its way of saying, no, I've got my way of doing things that is not a search, and you don't get to change that. And that lets the things proceed with a potentially cheap implementation that continues to work within the model that you've got, where search is still available, but it doesn't alter the implementation requirements.
Yeah, I think in Jmap, the way that works is, so the kind of API is consistent in that it's all /query, which is kind of a search, but we can allow the server to, for example, only support a search, which is really return everything in this folder, if that makes sense. So in that case, there's, it's not really a search. Anything else, it can go, as you're saying, I don't support that. I only support these simple type of queries.
So the scope of the search is a different issue I hadn't been thinking about. I'm more concerned with, I mean, Gmail is an environment where everything is a search. No surprise, that's who they are. But that's not the way an awful lot of email systems, MUA environments are designed. And my concern is imposing the Gmail activity, which is great when you like it, but not so great if you're trying to do a more classic kind of implementation.
I think, Dave, I would support actually your claim on the simple folder model here, also due to a little bit of a practical experience, because I think typically in a task system, you won't have as many items as you have in an email folder or something like that, because in the end, any task is like handcrafted, and it might be more than 10, I think somebody mentioned before, but it won't be 5,000 typically. At least I have not seen that in practice yet.
It can be. That's the trouble. Like typically it won't be, but
yeah, obviously. But I think based on empirics, I think it's rather unusual. And I think the advantage of many of those search-based approaches, and actually Jmap in a way has some tendency towards that for optimization of mobile clients, like to only transfer data which is like really required in a certain situation somehow. Yeah. So I think this is maybe a question to the more godfathers of Jmap here, like do we want to preserve the Jmap spirit on that, or would be fine actually to go which I would actually be fine with, to go with a more simple approach here for the task, to leave maybe something like the sorting to the client, even submitting all tasks for a folder to the client, even if that might be more tasks than the client want to display at one point. Actually, I also don't see so much of a use case for just querying a subset of the tasks, because typically if I want to manage tasks, I want to see all tasks somehow. I don't want to have for a reorder or reprioritization, I don't want to have actually the client need to resync with the server probably. I don't know.
Well, why not? I mean, I think somebody who's trying to do stuff, like, what have I got to get finished today? What are the top 10 easiest tasks to deal with? What are the, and there's all sorts of things you could imagine doing as a quick search. And on size of things, I mean, there's a mobile development system which currently has something like 8,000 outstanding tickets on it. What about an IMAP? What about your mail inbox when you have people with multi-megabyte, gigabyte inboxes? That's one folder. So I think the size is not the issue. Presumably we can deal with that, but I don't think we should assume that we're going to have 10 items or 20 items or 100 items. We could have thousands of them.
Yeah,
I just had a look at Fastmail's Liquid Planner if we were to export everything from our internal task tracking system, including done tasks, because it still keeps them in there so that you can see them in the history. There's 37,500 tasks in there at the moment.
Yeah. So I mean, size
so you need to be able to filter that.
We should just assume large and
yes,
and support small. But the people do want to see filtered views of stuff. What's the stuff related to the kernel? What's the stuff related to this particular device driver or whatever? And the even, what have I got to buy today when I go out shopping?
Yeah, I see Ken's in the queue, so I'll let him talk first.
Yeah, I'm going to take a little bit different tact. I'm not going to take sides on what we should include or exclude at this point. My suggestion would be, let's get some running code with at least some core features before we start getting off in the weeds in terms of what various, special features we may want or not want.
Right.
Just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think this discussion is really just down to, again, what capabilities the servers are mandated to support and which ones they can optionally support for /query, the standard Jmap kind of call for tasks. That's really what it comes down to. And I'm sure we can find a solution like we did with Mail that allows existing servers to support it reasonably easily, but also allows for advanced capabilities if they can.
Are there some more discussion points hiding off the bottom of that screen there, Bron?
No.
No, it's just those two.
Okay.
So I guess we're pretty much coming up at time for this. So we probably should. I think there's two things. We should do a call for adoption for this document if we think that this is something we want to adopt into the working group, because we haven't officially done that yet. That would be done on the mailing list, but do we think that's something we should be going ahead with?
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Cool. Awesome. We'll do that then. And so, yeah, the question of whether a task can be in multiple task lists, I think a lot of these questions come down to surveying what's out there now. So I think that's probably a good next step, is to collect some examples of systems that we want to support, and ideally even maybe talk to people who work on those systems and get an idea of what their challenge points have been.
Is there a standard way of doing that?
Write emails. Pretty much. Yeah.
No, but for instance, is there some whatever IETF tool that says you give me the Trello representative in IETF if there is any or something like that? Or do you?
No,
write?
Unfortunately.
Okay.
There is an IETF liaisons page, and it's got 1,600 lines in it going back to 1995, and it's unusable to figure out who people are, and they're generally liaisons with other standards bodies, not with individual companies.
Okay.
But if people have particular contacts, have friends at these places, please speak up, and we'd like to take advantage of that, I'm sure. You're showing up in the queue. Did you still want to say something?
Mike, that's you.
No, he's gone.
It's not.
All right. So we didn't have specific slides for Jmap sharing. Did you have anything to talk about on that for now, Neil?
Not really. I think it was just in my earlier point about separating it out. But that's really, it's the same model as before. It's just in a separate document, so you can more easily reference it.
Cool.
Well, it sort of parallels what we did with what's been done with DAV sharing, I mean, we realized that it was really distinct from calendars.
Alexa?
Yeah, I had a quick read today, and it looks reasonable. I probably will send some specific questions where things might be unclear. General comment, probably more examples would be useful.
Yeah, all these specs definitely need more examples. That's still my to-do list. Once we've got implementation experience, it's a lot easier to generate examples because I can get them off the wire, which also means less likely to make mistakes, which you do when you kind of hand do examples.
Right.
Cool. Moving right along then. Whoop, sorry. I can't click on it because it's UI elements for controlling. All right. JS Contact is next. So Robert.
Hello. Yeah, JS Contact is worked on by Mario Lofredo, who is also in the in this meeting today, and me. So I say let's start. Next slide, please. Okay, so we updated both RFC documents. The first one defining similar to JS Calendar the data format. The other RFC defining the mapping between the vCard data format and JS Contact. We took great care to cover the very majority of vCard properties. That we and you can see here the RFCs that we took into account during mapping. If you know of some other RFCs that you think are relevant, then please let us know. Next slide, please. Since last Jmap session, we had a couple of points lingering on where we haven't made really up our minds, and I would like to discuss these now in this meeting. So there was the ongoing task of identifying properties in JS Contact which should be lists versus sets, as we use in some other Jmap object, Jmap relevant objects, we looked at the properties that we have, which are multi-valued currently, and we try to separate them where we think that the order of entries is relevant versus where they are not. We only identified one where we are pretty sure that the order is totally irrelevant, which is categories. We kept the others currently as list values under the assumption that the order is relevant for display across different clients of the same data. So that was our basic assumptions. If client implementers are telling us now that this is really not relevant, then I would say that the whole list type discussion can be decided pretty quickly, and we will use sets wherever it makes more sense. So my question would be here at this point: do other implementers or do people using contacts, especially contact clients, would rather expect to have an inherent order across clients? Picking up again the discussion that we had previously for tasks with the sort order property. I'm pretty fine with both solutions. I think it's more relevant for client implementers in that respect. Yes, Neil?
Go for it, Neil.
Yeah, I think probably the order is important. It's a really tricky one. Like, I certainly think existing clients obviously all do show stuff in order, but on the other hand, I don't think they let you reorder them particularly easily, which is, it's one of the things of, is the order just because that's what we currently do, or is it actually an important attribute? I'm not sure. Certainly, being able to patch stuff with sets is nice, and it makes you less likely to accidentally overwrite data you wanted. But I'd probably lean slightly towards leaving as lists, but I don't feel too strongly from our client point of view. Mike?
This is order per attribute, is it?
Yes. So
yeah.
these
So
attributes,
yeah. Say the order of the phone numbers.
correct. Yes, these would all be arrays, so they would have an inherent order in opposition to a set where each entry then has a sort order property.
I'd be surprised if this is supported in any meaningful way at the moment. I mean,
well,
the libraries.
If you add two phone numbers to a V card, like you say a home phone number and a mobile phone number, I think if you add the home first, then the mobile, you'll see them in that order in the V card, and because the clients just generally map straight from that, you'll probably see them in the same order.
The reason I'm a little dubious is that I know at least iCal for J and its V card implementation just uses the underlying types, the Java lists and things for. So it'll pass it all into a list, and the order that you get is not necessarily the order that they're parsed in. It depends on the implementation of the list, and I suspect that other things are the same, unless you add properties to force an order or mandate that the parsed order be maintained. Implementations stand a chance of losing that. So you make some other update to something and then store it back, and you find some properties will have changed order. I mean, iCal specifically says, I think, somewhere in the thing that, order is not defined anywhere.
Yeah, that's basically the question currently. If clients are displaying vCard, do they typically tend to display them in order of the, I don't know, email property or whatever? And so is it more important that we can preserve this order because it's how it's currently done? Or if you are saying, if what you are saying,
I'm saying that
clients are ignoring order anyway. Then,
I think that's what I'm saying, is that I think the libraries are not explicitly attempting to retain order. So it's likely that it'll change. I mean, I guess some people are assuming, and maybe by chance it's sort of staying that way, but I don't think it's explicitly specified anywhere.
Okay, so that would speak. I mean, we don't need to make the decision now, but I hear that it might make more sense to use sets with some artificial identifier like we are doing in JS Calendar, for example, right?
Yeah, I'll to Mike's point, I don't think clients preserve an entire sort order. What I have seen is there's the pref parameter that you can put on certain properties. And I think, in the case of emails or phone numbers, the clients will let you specify which is your preferred, even though you could actually specify an order by varying the pref values. I think a lot of clients just specify whichever their top choice is, and that one always gets sorted to the top. I don't know if you can sort all six.
Oh yeah, there is the pref thing, isn't there?
And which is you could technically sort the entire list just by using pref, but I don't think anybody does that. I think they just choose one that floats to the top.
Yeah.
Mario, I don't recall at this point. I think we keep the pref parameter in vCard, but at the top of my head, I don't know how we are exactly mapping it. Do you know?
No, we are not keeping the pref parameter. We are only map the pref parameter as a Boolean is preferred or not. So.
Oh yeah, whereas in sorry.
we map the information that the item identified by the pref parameter equal 1 is the preferred one.
Yeah,
the
because
others
in vcard it's... Sorry.
Yes, the other are not preferred all in the same way. So
right, so it's a numeric value in vcard actually. So it's kind of the sort order property anyway.
Yeah.
Well, it's a sort of a. I mean, I even if it wasn't treated as fully as a sort order, I see why you want the numeric, because try this phone number first, and if that fails, try this one, and then try that one. So I think that's probably what the point of the numeric thing is.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can switch to that model.
I'd be wary about removing things like that, which possibly have a use, and we just don't know if people are making use of that, and what you end up doing is just adding an incompatibility that it probably isn't necessary to do so.
Okay, then I would say we'll check for the lists properties, which of them have a pref parameter in vcard at this moment, and for any which have not, we can then still decide if we want to switch to the same model or not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that model sounds good.
You can assign the pref parameter almost all the elements. So maybe I have to check, but probably all the elements here shown as list can be assigned a pref parameter, a numeric pref parameter.
Yes, that's what I think.
Using the same pattern for everything makes sense and simplifies it for client developers who are just working in JS contact world. So I quite like that.
So
the other thing that exists, well, that's not a multi-valued thing, is it? Preferred birthday, is it the 28th of February or the 1st of March? If you live in the middle there. I have seen in the wild cards that have grouping construct ahead of the keys, so that allows you to group related fields together. Do we have support for that in here? Because that's also going to be something that gives us sorting of some sort. I'll see if I can find some examples.
Yeah, that would be great.
To Bron's point about making this a generic construct, I agree with that, because I think vcard also lets you sort full names and nicknames and other things that aren't currently on this list.
Yeah, for names and that we are kind of switching to a different model, but we can of course see if and how to preserve preference there. But I agree that for the general case, we should have a generic. We should have the same approach and not many for different object types. I'm not. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to make one short point here. So first of all, from my practical experience so far, I don't know many tools or web UIs of contact that really preserve some sort of order. What they mainly do is they show the filled fields first, for instance, or they may prefer the homework over other fields, like in addresses or something like that. I also don't think many clients would actually use that possibility of rearranging that stuff. Also, if many users would make the effort of sorting email addresses in a large extent, I sort of maybe doubt. And I see there's actually three solutions here in the room right now. There is these lists, like here, yeah? there is this numerical thing somebody proposed, and there might be something like more like a star or pref approach where I can maybe individually select one or two really favorites or something like that. I think one disadvantage of this list, like it is proposed here in a way, I think so somehow, is that users might be confused not to know if it's really sorted. Because, you know, if they just see the list, they might not remember if they did that deliberately. Yeah? Maybe that as a point, a little bit cautioning against the way it's written here. I'm also not sure if the numerical approach of really having a dedicated number for each sorted thing is the way to go, because as I said, I doubt a little bit that people will make that effort for 5 email addresses to really assign a dedicated priority for each of them. So I think in terms of usability, at least, my heart would beat probably for a very simple favorite or star approach in a way where I can select a favorite one. But yeah, that's just my point here.
Yeah, I mean, a numeric ID would just be a super set solution of the favorites, right? You can assign the same numeric ID for your favorites, but yeah,
I think the point is
don't want to over-engineer it.
It's not. I mean, I don't know what the point. I think of the preference is not for a viewer to nominate their favorite. It's for the person who's being referred to specify ways in which they may be contacted and to prioritize them. Is more about what we're talking about. So when you have multiple emails, you might well want to order them as the one. You should use this one for contacting me, and if that fails, fall back to this other one. So I think that there is a point in the ordering, but it's not just a matter of convenience or which is your favorite one to use.
But is that really the case, Mike? Like, I mean, for organizations, like, would I use that to define which organization? What would it mean in that sense? And I mean, even for email addresses, you have like work, home, or something, and the person that wants to contact you decides on her own if there is a work contact or a home. It's a home purpose, and you rather seldomly will use multiple work addresses, email addresses in your
Well, they're all good points. The problem I have with this kind of discussion is there have been years and years of discussion on creating a vCard, and this stuff has been hashed out by people in hours and hours and hours of discussion. We can simply put that aside and say we don't think there's a use for it. But on the other hand, at the time they thought there was, and perhaps there still is. I don't object to trying to trim the thing down if you want to, but on the other hand, simply discarding stuff because at the moment you can't see a need for it opens yourself the possibility of finding people implemented it with those features in, and now you can't. Now you're not supporting them.
I would certainly agree with your point, Mike, on putting some effort on compatibility with what is already there in vCard, because there is a lot of stuff in the wild. So certainly, that's the point.
And that's I think the cost of implementation is pretty low. We can spend our time filtering this stuff out and deciding whether it's good or not. But I think we should more or less say let's just do it because it's already there.
The other thing with it is that we can then use that for things where there is more need for ordering. If we run into them later, we've got a standard method that works across everything. And a simple client can just treat any value there as being preference and sort it to the top and not actually care.
Okay.
Quickly to follow on Mike's point, I agree with what he said, but if we are going to remove things, we may want to try to come up with the reasons why vCard 4 wasn't as widely adopted as 3. Was it because the stuff that was added in 4 wasn't useful, or was it laziness, or was there some other reason? And that might help inform us as to what may be able to be trimmed out of the current vCard specs.
vCard 4 trimmed anything. It actually added quite a bit of stuff, and the reason for vCard 4 is actually well documented, because years ago in CalConnect we had a workshop, and there are a whole bunch of bullet points on why we needed a new version of vcard, and unfortunately, all those bullet points still apply. The inadequate sort ordering, names coming out in the wrong order, not being able to determine things were the right way round, UIDs missing, so you got duplications and all the rest of it. So vcard 4 is a better model to follow because it tried to address a lot of known deficiencies. As to why nobody did it, the best reason that I've heard is stated is that vcard 4 didn't provide enough value to justify the time and effort of moving forward. People found workarounds like adding, like Apple adds an X property UID and uses that, and for most of the cases it works fine. But I've got to say, vcard 3 in practice is pretty much of a disaster if you try and move data around.
Okay, yeah. So you answer my question, Mike. So if vcard 4 is the better model, let's follow that.
I think it is. It's just inertia, and this is the opportunity to actually get ourselves to a better data model.
Yes. So for the specific topic in question for list types versus sets, I very much hear that we will switch to a couple of these properties to sets, and using a numeric preference, or however we might call it. Firstly, because it allows us to be compatible with the vcard pref parameter, and also because it's the most versatile and doesn't really make things that much more difficult than a simple favorite approach.
Cool.
Good. I'd say let's switch to the next slide, because I think we'll spend some
just before we go on, were there any strong objections to that?
Okay, sorry.
I didn't. There was a bunch of discussion on it. Hans-Jörg in particular, do you want to say that you disagree with that, or are you happy with it?
No, I'm happy. I was just making some, remarks.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Let's keep going.
Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so names and addresses, but especially addresses. So for names, we already previously decided that instead of having a complex object that has fields like first name, surname, whatever, we'll switch to a more generic approach, which is where a name is basically defined by a list of tagged values. So a tag would be personal name, and its value would be Robert. We did that mainly because we saw that that names are very much different between cultures, and this approach allows to express hopefully the majority of them in a more meaningful way than it's currently done, and it also allows to still generate a complete name by generating a string out of the value of these tag name components in order. In addition to that, we still have a full name property, which is a localized string. That's both because we have vcards which do not have an n property, so a structured name at all, and only an fn property. So we'll want to preserve that. But the other thing, and that's why it's a localized string, is that we want to have a full name which allows to express the name in the locale of the contact, or probably even several ways. So that's for name, and I think we already had a decision there. But of course, if there are thoughts or objections to that now, please let me know. But the other the other object are addresses, and there we had pushed back the decision how to express them using a complex type or also detect value approach for a long time. I still would say we still haven't 100% decided yet, but at the moment we think that a complex type for an address, that more speaks for a complex type of an address. So why is that? We think that addresses are that for addresses we want to enforce more structure, because we assume that that clients and applications will expect more structure there than for a name, and so in either case, either if we use the tags or if we use properties like we do now, we want to make sure that we capture all different components that can make up an address. And for that, we of course looked at vCard, but we also looked at APIs of major commercial internet players, be that Google, Microsoft, or Baidu, and we came to the conclusion that the current model seems to captures at least all the properties that they are returning for addresses. Now, I came to this also with the thought that many addresses on this world cannot be expressed with that scheme, but and I also hear people saying that, and I'm not necessarily doubting it, but I've never seen an example for that. So I think what we are lacking here is expertise. So first of all, it would be great, for example, Mike, if we could contact at CalConnect at DHL, who might bring more expertise into that. But also, of course, probably people here in this session have more experiences with addresses that cannot be expressed in the current model.
Yeah, I mean, that the person to raise it, I mean, that's essentially they've been the motivation for the ISO work on this, is that the vCard representation just doesn't work for many areas.
That's correct. I wanted to mention that. So we know there is work in ISO on that, and I look forward to their presentation at CalConnect next month. I looked at their approach, and the way I understand it, they are defining profiles and address profiles, and each profile can have different fields. But I wonder if that would be overcomplicate JS context. So if we would require implementers to implement these profiles, most likely, as I understand, being defined in some profile registry, I wonder if that's not too complex and it rather scares away people from using that format. If I also don't know if that ISO standard will be open. So I don't have enough information if we should just take what they are doing, because it's because I don't have enough.
Well, that was part of the motivation behind getting a liaison relationship with ISO, and that we can, as CalConnect, we can publish these as CalConnect standards, which would be free and open to use. But the issue, I think, is that essentially this lack of usability of the addresses makes vCard unusable in certain areas, and in large areas. So it just seems a pity to embed that in a specification. I mean, vCard 4 was supposed to address some of the issues, but it's a very Western-oriented, European, USA-oriented thoughts on how to structure addresses, and it simply doesn't apply in many areas. So
yeah, I mean, I also heard this. I mean, Wikipedia Wikipedia not necessarily always is a great source, but as far as I understand from there, and also the Universal Postal blob that they include there, it seems to me, and I'm a dilettante in that area, that's not necessarily the case, that many addresses can't be expressed internationally in this format. So it would be really great to have concrete either examples or at least more concrete hints on what isn't covered currently.
Okay, let me try and contact you. I'll try and contact the DHL person, because they, as I said, they were motivated enough to rejoin CalcNet because of the liaison relationship, but what was driving them was this problem with addresses. So I'll see if I can contact them and find out what it was specifically that they had as a problem. But it's significant enough that they rejoin.
Yeah, cool. So then I would then I look forward to this and also probably we can talk with them at next CalConnect.
Yeah, if we can get them to, yeah, we'll try.
Ron,
Great, thanks. No, I'm just putting myself back in. I realized that my video and sound got turned off when I got reset by the system, so I thought I should pop back in here so that I can more easily respond quickly.
Okay. So I would say for addresses, I don't think we're yet at the point where to make a hard decision on how to define them in Jmap in JS context. But I think we won't ever be able to do that if we don't really get the experts at the table. So at the moment, I hear that it seems to me that the people who are currently interested in this draft are not necessarily the ones who also have the expertise of really really defining the international gaps that we see with the current address scheme. So yeah, I guess the next step is to identify who can tell us more. Other thoughts on this?
Cool. I saw from Jabba that Ken agrees that we should try and get expertise to this. So thanks, Mike, for volunteering to find the contact. And are we happy with the name component? We kind of skipped over that in this, but did anyone want to speak to that?
I think just briefly, my recollection of how the vCard 4 was supposed to was so one of the properties was name order, I think, where you could specify what components, how to order the components, the name. Oh, I think it was a sort order property or something of that kind. And what that'll one of the problems with vCard 3 and previous was that applications would choose to sort the data in all sorts of different ways. They'd try and break the name up and then sort either on the last name or the first name or whatever, and people couldn't find stuff. So I believe that there was a sort order property added which basically lists the name elements in order so you can have a consistent sort. Do we have something of that kind?
Well, that's what this array is. The point is that the array lists them in order.
No, the point, I think the problem with names is that they can be displayed in one order and sorted in a different order. So,
the sort component for
yes,
yep.
Yeah. So the sort order thing simply lists the names of the components that you sort by and in the order by which you sort them. So and the point there, of course, is which is the name that matters when you sort, and it depends on culture. It's not a thing you can derive from. You know, do you sort by the family name? Do you sort by the personal name? So that was in vCard 4 as an attempt to resolve known issues with these things, and that sort of was also trying to resolve some of the issues over merging of cards. Is how do you identify two as being, well, a UID works if you do two identical cards, but what if you've got two cards that refer to the same person, but the names are ordered differently for some reason?
Yeah, I'm just looking this up in the vcard draft, and yeah, so it's sorting multiple names, as you mean, and I'm just checking how we are. Okay, so actually, I see that the name in our current model is a single valued property, so we wouldn't even allow for multiple names. So probably we should change that anyway.
So this isn't multiple names within a single card. This is, you've got 100 addresses and you want to display them in a sorted order, sorted by name. And is that sorted by surname? Is it sorted by first name? Where alphabetically? What's the collation order that they sort with?
Yeah.
That's the interesting challenge here. Neil.
The property is an order by card. So when you create the card, you specify what is the sort order for which components. How do you order the components when you're sorting?
Yeah, so you can have multiple n properties in the vcard, and you can define a sort order for these n properties within.
No. It's what you're specifying is which is the most important component of the name, and then when you're ordering the components of the name. So when you're sorting across cards, you want to sort them consistently on a name. So it's not, you can't simply.
So this is does Bron Gondwana sort before Mike Douglas or not? And the answer depends whether you're sorting by first name or surname.
Yeah,
but that's a client property, normally not something you'd encode in the. Like,
no,
you can switch our client to sort by first name or last name.
No, it's a matter of flagging which. That's the problem is this assumption that first name last name has some significance as it doesn't.
But that's why we have the tagged version here, because yes, they may not be in that order. So this lets you put them in order, like in cultures where the family name comes first, if you like. But you can still tag that this is a family name, not their personal name, and so sort by the correct thing. I think basically, I think I'm saying is this system is designed to solve this problem. Are there any changes you're proposing here, or do you actually agree with that?
I'm not seeing how it solves the problem.
Well, because so if it's culture where it was like you wrote your name Stepanak Robert, then it would be in that order in the name component array, but you'd still tag that Stepanak was the surname and Robert was the personal name.
Yes, this is also my understanding, and Mike, I understand that this sort as parameter in vcard allows you to define the order of the parameters to take into account. And if we want to preserve that, then we would need to have some multi-valued sort order property.
Yeah,
right?
we need something more than what's just listed there as name component, because otherwise Mr. would sort altogether, and anyone with a different prefix would sort differently if we were just taking those fields as in this slide in order and calling that your sort. So we certainly need something that's.
It's not about that though. It's you would sort by like personal, and then this lets you extract which of these names is personal to then do your sort order comparison.
I think we definitely need some examples of how interfaces sort and how this stuff was designed to be used, because I think that Mike's right that there's more to this than just you sort by personal or you sort by surname. There
let's have some examples on the list then.
Yep.
Okay, any other comments on names or addresses at this point?
They're hard.
Great. So then next slide, please. Okay, groups. So in the previous draft, we had a very simple object called contact group, I think, or card group or whatever, which basically had a name and a list and a list type property, which defined the UIDs that are members of this group. Then we came to realize that in vCard, this is actually done by having a kind equals group property in the vCard, and that basically meant that a vCard with kind equals group can have any other vCard property too. So we came to realize if we want to map cleanly from vCard to JS contact, then we'd be throwing away lots of information for mapping these to a group. So we changed it in the current draft to defining a JS card group to be kind of allow me the term subclass of a JS card. So basically it has a new property members, and it requires the kind property of the inherited property, so to say, as group. So this does away with all the issue of throwing away too much information for group vCards. But of course, it comes with a cost. So first of all, we now have nested groups, and since these groups are nested together by UIDs, we need to check for circular groups, for example, and we also need to enforce that the JS card groups and the JS cards, so basically the leaf objects and the group objects, share the same UID namespace. So at this point, we might wonder if we even need a JS card group, if it's just a JS card that can be group or not. There again, I wonder first for applications if it makes sense to have a distinct type of groups, and if it makes sense for these groups to basically have all the properties of a regular contact. Do
any vCards with the kind equals group exist in the wild that have all these additional properties on them? Because theoretically they could, but I certainly haven't ever seen a group that has anything more than a name and a list of member UIDs.
Yeah, that's what I'm uncertain about. I also don't know any, but it has to mean that probably some services are using them and I just haven't seen them. So
this does feel like massive overkill and a bit of a pain. I definitely prefer the earlier option, but
yeah, I'd be tempted to have a call and see if anyone is using those facilities, and if not, define a group that doesn't include those. And if you need something fancier, then and maybe there's properties that make sense to have on a group, but I don't think a full card on a group makes sense.
That's an unknowable thing, isn't it? We can't know if anybody's not using this.
No, but we can define something and say use this, and if everyone uses it, then happy days. And there's a clear mapping between cards that don't have these additional properties and this, and cards that do have these additional properties. If they hit one of these translation systems, then they will pop up and say, hey, we need this. But allowing all the things that were accidental side effects of it not being locked down enough before, just because someone might possibly be using them somewhere in the wild who's never spoken up or never shown up in any data that anyone's seen. I think this is a fair case for saying there's a subset that's very commonly used, and we should define that as an easy to use object that people will use.
Yeah, especially because this is quite an important object for interoperability, for a data export, import, I think, and you want it to be easy to use and not just look and go, that's horrible, and I'm never going to do it.
Yeah, okay, so it basically boils down to the same thing as for addresses. we don't really know if we are making it hard for some people who would be interested in the spec to use it. But again, I also don't have a good idea how can come to a consensus other than asking on the list. We can address this at next CalConnect. Probably there are more people. There is the vCard group there, so probably they have they know more about this.
Yeah, I think this is much less so than addresses. Addresses are trying to map something in the real world that exists, whereas this is just trying to map something in the protocol that exists.
Yes.
So it's not like we're trying to represent anything outside just this.
No, it's really just about making sure that we are not making people unhappy who would be interested in this RFC, but come to the conclusion they can't use it because we are lacking expressibility. So, but yeah, let's.
Yeah, I think having a different JS group object, which can always be extended later, we could do another spec that extends it and adds new properties to it if necessary.
Okay, good. So basically it means we revert back to what we had before.
Does anyone want to speak against that suggestion?
Actually, one thing though is
yep.
If we revert it back to before, let me just check if we already allowed for multi-leveled structures, so that we allow to have a group to have more groups. I think that could still be relevant. Just check here. Group cards. Yeah, because in the previous definition, a JS card group could only have cards as members, but we might want to allow this to have cards or card groups, so that you can basically span a tree of groups and contacts. I could imagine this being useful, for example, for mailing. I don't know if mailing list is the right name, but I saw, for example, in Microsoft productivity tools, I think they have these multi-leveled mailing list change. I don't know the name they're using for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is consensus that we want to have this, that we want to allow to embed groups in other groups.
I don't know that we've discussed that yet. Did anyone else want to speak on this area?
Yeah, that would be cool.
There's a couple of people with microphones on, but not saying anything.
Do we have examples of nested groups in the wild? It's not a use case I know about, but I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
No, it's been a while that I've actually used it, but I think, for example, in Microsoft environments on Exchange servers, you have these organizations tend to organize their departments in groups, but those are the sub-departments in the
makes sense.
Other groups.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. So that sounds like a plan.
Okay. So if there are no other points on groups at this moment, we can switch to the next slide. Yeah. So I was wondering if other people at this stage are already interested in implementing. The more implementation is, the earlier, the better. So if you do, please contact Mario and me, or just say now. And of course, we'd appreciate any more feedback on the draft. I'd say better wait until we've updated the draft with today's decisions. Neil, thank you for your thorough feedback before this session. Two of the points that we haven't discussed of your feedback in this at this meeting yet now is the roles property, where you were basically saying that you don't understand the purpose of it, and looking at it, I now agreed. It's basically a mapping from the vcode role property, and I understand that there its purpose is to define roles from a specific set of organizational roles defined in the X520 ISO standard. I really don't know if that's for this property. I really don't know if it's still relevant, and if we should restrict it to the same values. Probably job title is enough. Mike, you're in the queue.
I was just going to say, I was playing out with the contacts app while talking there. You can add groups to groups.
Which contact app you're talking about?
On the Mac.
Ah, yeah, okay. Yeah, so for roles, I can imagine that we are removing that property. We will ask for that, and the other thing is the resource type, but I don't think we need to discuss that now. I'll send something on the list. Okay, so that's it. Mario, do you have any other comments?
Not on my side.
All right, thanks everyone. Next up, Blob, just very quickly, I have done nothing on it since last time. Haven't even updated the Fastmail implementation to match this spec. My apologies. Does anyone have any comments or feedback on it before I go and do the next draft?
I mean, I do. I don't. It's not worth spending much time on right now, though. I don't think it. Yeah, it's obviously pretty rough at the moment. Like, there's no description of what a lot of the stuff means. Like, you can probably guess pretty accurately from the names, but like what data as base64, data as text actually do, would need to be specified rather than just guessed at. Yeah, it's a bit vague in places. It's probably the main thing, but yeah, I don't know too much.
Let's work on that when we're both awake. Cool. All right, and then Civ, Ken's slides are here.
All right, couple opening remarks. Robert and I did not coordinate our shirts, in case anybody's interested. Secondly, everything in this current draft is implemented in the Cyrus Jmap server, and everything other than the test method is currently running in production at Fastmail. And we've effectively shut down our managed Civ stack internally, so it's a viable alternative to managed Civ in that respect. First slide, Ron, please. So changes since we last met. I've reverted back to using only blob IDs for specifying the script content in set, validate, and test. This goes back to looking more like the core Jmap methods. In absence of the blob set method, which is in bronze draft, it still requires you to do a separate round trip with an upload before you can actually run one of these methods. But with blob set, everything can be done in one round trip. Also added the rate limit and request to large errors as possible responses for test method, which was discussed last time. And I also added a new section discussing the compatibility with the vacation response object type in the email spec. Basically, as I outlined it, I think this is fairly non-controversial, but if anybody has any other opinions, please let me know. Basically stated that you can fetch the vacation response with a get, you can activate it or deactivate it with set using the onSuccess activate script argument, and you cannot update or destroy this with set. The reason for the last item is vacation response is specified to be a singleton type object, so it's always there, it's just a matter of whether it's active or not. Any opinions on any of those three items with regards to vacation response? Hearing none, we'll move on. Okay, one other change that we didn't discuss last time, but I found was kind of lacking. The past draft did some hand waving in terms of how the names for positional arguments would be generated. It basically said you pull them from the syntax or usage portion of the relevant spec. And I did some research, and each one of the Civ extension drafts tends to outline their arguments slightly different. So it seemed like it was better off to have a more concrete way of specifying these. So what I did was I removed the positional arguments from the hash of arguments and put them into their own separate array, obviously in order of the required position per the spec. So on the next slide, there's an example of what this looks like as currently implemented in Cyrus. I'll defer to the JSON experts as to whether or not this is JSON-y enough. On the next slide after this, I have another possible structure for how this response would look. I don't care either way. It's pretty much syntactic sugar as far as I'm concerned. Any strong opinions one way or the other? Neil, any thoughts?
Can you go back to the previous one?
So this slide here looks a lot like what you see with the array of method calls.
It's array of mixed elements type thing.
Yes.
Yep.
But a fixed set is a tuple, really. It's three.
Yes.
It's always going to be three, and they're always going to be at the same time within that. It's just that there's no separate tuple type in JSON.
Right.
So yeah. Yeah.
Second might be more verbose, but might be slightly easier to
Can certainly take it to the list. We don't necessarily have to have it.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll take that to the list. Next slide, please. So one thing we did discuss last time, and I forgot to put in this draft, was we had discussed whether we want a is included or some other such name property on the Civ script object itself that can be filtered upon. So the user could determine that they have a script that's being included someplace else, and you don't want to delete it, or whatever other the use cases could possibly be. I don't know, Lexi, you were one of the few people I think that said this would be useful. Do you still feel that way? Do we want to keep this? Have you changed your mind in any way, shape, or form?
I thought about this since last time, to be honest.
It seems useful, and I haven't given much thought into how difficult it is to implement. I don't think it would be. So if you feel it's useful, I can certainly add it.
Yeah, try, and if it's too much pain, then we'll discuss.
Okay. One thing that I forgot. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. One other item I failed to put on this slide regarding the test method. You currently can specify an array of email IDs so that the same script can be run against each one of these emails. I had given some thought about how best to handle some of the various extensions. For instance, vacation, the test request right now, you can specify whether or not the sender has been replied to previously. We don't do anything similar for, let's say, a duplicate test. So my thinking was, given that we've got the array, should the state be maintained between the emails as they get run? So for instance, you have an incoming email that you're going to test against from user foo. The first time they'll get a vacation response. If you send another test email from the same user, they won't get it the second time. Or similarly with duplicate test, if you send the same email twice, the second one will be essentially, drop in the floor. The one question that I did have here was, would we have to specify basically the client could specify a synthesized receive date for the various emails so the server would know how to properly handle them. Any thoughts on something like this? Or, flip side is we could just drop the whole array idea on the floor and only do one at a time.
I argue for dropping the whole array idea on the floor and just doing one at a time. You can always specify multiple of these things in a single Jmap stanza as separate method calls.
Correct.
So was the array a reason to be able to carry over state, or was it just a kind of useful side effect?
Useful side effect. The original intent was run the same script against a bunch of emails.
I can see running script against multiple emails, but I don't see much reason to run it against multiple email messages as opposed to. Is it like different senders, basically?
Yeah, it's basically you've got one script that you want to see what the behavior is going to look like, and you grab a bunch of email blob IDs from your inbox, let's say, and say run this script against all these emails and tell me what's going to happen.
Actually, the one argument in favor of having the email IDs for that is that you can use back references from a query rather than having to construct the individual commands. So you could do a query and then back reference the resulting IDs and pass that straight into Civ test. That would be quite nice.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point.
I can marginally see a reason to have to run against multiple email messages, but then you cannot carry over state because that's not what Civ does.
Okay, so sounds like we're in favor of keeping
alternatively, you are
email
just
ID.
basically sort of so you're not even
You'd be implementing a virtual email server that has its own internal state.
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah,
we'll leave the array. We'll leave the array. We'll forget about the maintaining state ID. So for a vacation test, you still have to specify in the request itself whether the particular recipient has been, or when a particular sender has last received a vacation response. Do we want to do anything similar for duplicate tests or any other extensions that I can't think of off the top of my head?
If you're doing it for one, you might as well do it for all if it's not too much pain.
Okay, I'll go through the list of available Civ tests and see what other metadata we might need to populate in the request. Okay, if there's nothing further, I am done.
Great.
Thanks for the feedback.
And I believe we're now up to milestone review. Here's our milestones. So we've got some new things in here. Let me just take some notes on it. Adopt document for creating blobs. I don't even remember whether we did a call for adoption on that. I think we did. So that should hopefully happen now-ish, April 2021. Civ, that's already been submitted, yeah? So I should actually mark that as done. Or has it?
No, that says submitted to ISG, which it is not.
Yeah, sorry, yep. Okay, so Civ, when do you think we'll get that done by?
I don't think there's anything other than test itself that needs work. So I would like to think, June timeframe should give us plenty of time to work on that.
Cool. So do a working group last call after the next document.
And working group last call for that too, right? Before it goes to IESG?
Yes.
Yes, yep. So that's why I'm giving through till June for that. Means we can do the working group last call hopefully in April or May.
I would expect maybe a 2 or 3 draft churn on test until we get what we want.
Cool. Jmap address books. We haven't done a document for Jmap address books yet. Neil or Robert,
That's
I guess.
different from contacts?
Contacts is the format. Address books is the Jmap server to client way of shipping those contacts around. Robert.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to say
that. So do we have an idea when we might adopt a document for that?
Do we want to wait until we have the JS contact spec done a bit more first? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. So should we bump that out to maybe like September, October?
Fine,
you mean
whatever.
JS contact or the address?
The address books, Jmap
The
address
Jmap
books.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
I'm going to say August. Let's be optimistic. All right. Jmap blobs, obviously, that's going to have to wait because it's January there. So I'll say April and then July. Submit Jmap calendars. What do we think for that? Hopefully after next IETF, so August.
Yeah, well, hopefully, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Jmap quotas. We didn't even look at that.
Draft's expired, I think. Unless I was looking at the wrong thing, I don't think it's been updated in a while.
Right.
Yep. All right, I'll follow up with the authors on that. SMIME, Alexi.
Right, so let's do SMIME signature. I think it expired, but I think it can be sent to ISG by June. I'll just revive it and then you can do last call. The other one, I can post something by August. July, maybe.
Yep. Cool. That's the adopt. Yep. And then submit JS contact. What do we think for that?
After next IETF, I'd say.
Cool. So make that August as well, which is makes sense that we submit it and then we adopt address books at the same time. Informational guidance document, that's still in the future, so we'll see how we get to for that. In terms of new milestones to add to this, we need to adopt tasks, and I'd say we can get that done in April 2021 because it's just a matter of doing a call for adoption. After that, do we have anything else from today that people want to add to this?
Well, not really to add to it, but just some late breaking news that MDN just went to off 48 state during our meeting here. So that's progress.
Wow. Awesome. Nice. Thank you. Then I think that is all the things. I've put adopt the sharing document as well because that's something we agreed to do during this. So that will also be April 2021. And that is all I can see looking back through our notes from today. Does anybody have any other business apart from this? That is the final item for our last 5 minutes here. Oh, not that one, this one. All right. Some of the material that came up today will be discussed during the CalConnect meeting, which is in the second week of April, so it's a month from now. So I there's a plan to do an interim meeting for Calext probably already during that. I don't know if we want to also do an interim meeting for Jmap or do a combined interim meeting. Any opinions or comments on any of that?
Probably the only other person not going to CalConnect. So
Sorry?
yeah, I'm probably one of the few people who doesn't go to CalConnect. So
yep.
You want to do a combined one, as long as that's okay with,
Yep, CalConnect's quite happy for us to put in interim calls for IETF meetings into the schedule and have CalConnect people show up as well. Ken?
If it's just limited to calendars and contacts, I think that makes sense. Obviously, the other stuff we're doing here doesn't really fit in the context of CalConnect.
Yep. Yeah, we would obviously just discuss the topics that have crossover interest in that interim meeting. Cool. I suspect we'll just do one interim meeting and advertise it to both working groups and say, come along. Topics that are in both these working groups will be discussed. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. That's everything we had to discuss today. Robert?
I was just preparing to say goodbye. Sorry, I didn't.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. No worries. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for
Thanks,
joining
everybody.
us at whatever crazy times you had. Thanks, Jim.
Bye.
Did you have anything else, Jim, by the way, before we're done?
No, I don't. Couple action items here, but sure. I think that'll take care of it.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Cheers, everybody. See ya.
All right. Thanks, everyone.